Sarah stood in the cemetery, her trembling hands clutching a shovel. The cold wind whipped through her hair, but she didn't care. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the freshly dug grave in front of her. It had only been 3 months since her father's sudden death, but something didn't feel right, something dark. "I have to know the truth," Sarah whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the storm. Her father, a kind and loving man, had died under mysterious circumstances. The doctors had called it a heart attack, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Her stepmother, Evelyn, had been too quick to cremate him, too eager to move on. And now Sarah was determined to uncover the secrets buried with him. With a deep breath, Sarah plunged the shovel into the wet earth. The sound of metal hitting soil echoed in the empty cemetery. Each scoop of dirt felt like a step closer to the truth, but also a step deeper into a nightmare she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Hours passed and the rain continued to fall. Sarah's hands were raw and blistered, but she didn't stop. Finally, the shovel hit something solid. Her heart skipped a beat as she cleared the last layer of dirt, revealing the coffin beneath. Her father's coffin. Tears streamed down her face as she hesitated for a moment. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I have to know." With trembling hands, Sarah pried open the coffin lid. The hinges creaked loudly, and the smell of decay hit her like a wave. But what she saw inside made her blood run cold. The coffin was empty. Sarah stumbled back, her mind racing. "No, this can't be," she muttered, her voice shaking. Her father's body was gone. But how? Who would do this? And why? Panic set in as Sarah pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling as she dialed the police. "I need help," she said urgently when the operator answered. "My father's grave. It's empty. Someone took his body. I think he was murdered." As she waited for the police to arrive, Sarah's mind raced with questions. What had really happened to her father? And why had Evelyn been so eager to get rid of him? One thing was clear. This was just the beginning of a dark and dangerous journey to uncover the truth. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights cutting through the stormy night. Sarah stood shivering, her clothes soaked, as she explained everything to the officers. They were skeptical at first, but the empty coffin was undeniable evidence that something was terribly wrong. As the investigation began, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn. Her stepmother had always been cold and distant, but after her father's death, Evelyn had become even more secretive. She had quickly sold their family home and moved into a luxurious apartment downtown, claiming it was too painful to stay in the house where her husband had died. But Sarah knew better. Evelyn had never loved her father. She had only married him for his money. The next morning, Sarah decided to confront Evelyn. She drove to the apartment, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. When she arrived, Evelyn opened the door, her perfectly manicured eyebrows raised in surprise. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" Evelyn asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We need to talk," Sarah said, pushing past her into the apartment. The place was filled with expensive furniture and artwork, a stark contrast to the modest home Sarah had grown up in. Evelyn sighed, crossing her arms. "If this is about the will, I already told you. Your father left everything to me. You're not getting a penny." "This isn't about money," Sarah snapped. "This is about Dad. I know you had something to do with his death." Evelyn's face paled, but she quickly recovered, forcing a laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. Your father died of a heart attack. The doctors confirmed it." "Then why was his coffin empty?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling with anger. "Why did you cremate him so quickly? What are you hiding?" For a moment, Evelyn looked genuinely shocked. But then her expression hardened and she took a step closer to Sarah. "Listen carefully, Sarah. If you know what's good for you, you'll drop this. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." Sarah's heart raced as she stared into Evelyn's cold, calculating eyes. There was something sinister behind her words, something that sent a chill down Sarah's spine, but she refused to back down. "I'm not going to stop until I find out the truth," Sarah said firmly. "And if you had anything to do with Dad's death, I'll make sure you pay for it." Evelyn smirked, a cruel smile spreading across her face. "You're just like your father, stubborn and naive. But trust me, Sarah, you'll regret this. As Sarah left the apartment, her mind was racing. Evelyn's threats only confirmed her suspicions. Her stepmother was hiding something, and Sarah was determined to find out what it was. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her father had left behind some kind of clue, something that would lead her to the truth. She decided to revisit their old family home, which had been sold just weeks after her father's death. The new owners hadn't moved in yet, and Sarah knew this might be her only chance to search the place. She waited until nightfall, her heart pounding as she approached the house. The windows were dark, and the front yard was overgrown with weeds. It looked abandoned, a shell of the warm, loving home it had once been. Using the spare key she had kept hidden, Sarah unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the floor creaked under her feet as she made her way to her father's study. This had always been his sanctuary, the place where he spent hours working on his projects and writing in his journals. Sarah flipped on the flashlight on her phone and began searching the room. She opened drawers, flipped through books, and even checked behind the framed photos on the walls, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Just as she was about to give up, her flashlight caught something glinting under the desk. She knelt down and saw a small metallic key taped to the underside of the desk. Her breath hitched as she peeled it off and held it in her hand. It was old and slightly rusted, but it looked important. Her father had hidden it for a reason. "What are you hiding, Dad?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and fear. She quickly searched the rest of the study but found nothing else. The key had to lead to something her father didn't want anyone else to find. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to think of where it might fit. Then it hit her. The safe. Her father had always kept a small antique safe in the basement. He had rarely opened it in front of her, but she remembered him mentioning it once or twice. Without wasting another second, Sarah hurried downstairs, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The basement was damp and cold, filled with boxes of old belongings and forgotten memories. In the corner, covered in a thin layer of dust, was the safe. Sarah's hands shook as she inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open. Inside, she found a stack of documents, a USB drive, and a handwritten letter addressed to her. Her heart pounded as she picked up the letter and unfolded it. The familiar handwriting made her eyes well up with tears. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth while I was alive, but I didn't want to put you in danger. The truth is, my death was no accident. Evelyn has been involved in something far darker than I ever imagined. She's been working with dangerous people, and I discovered something I shouldn't have. The documents in this safe will explain everything. Be careful, Sarah. Trust no one, not even the police. There are people who will do anything to keep this secret buried. I love you more than anything, and I'm so proud of the strong, brave woman you've become. Please, stay safe. Love always, Dad." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she clutched the letter to her chest. Her worst fears had been confirmed. Her father had been murdered, and Evelyn was at the center of it all. But who were these dangerous people he mentioned? And what had he discovered that was worth killing him over? Sarah quickly gathered the documents and the USB drive, stuffing them into her bag. She knew she couldn't stay here much longer. As she turned to leave, she heard a noise upstairs. A faint creak like someone stepping on the old wooden floor. Her blood ran cold. She wasn't alone. Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound came again, a slow, deliberate step followed by another. Someone was in the house. She quickly turned off her flashlight, plunging the basement into complete darkness. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way out. The footsteps grew louder, moving closer to the basement door. Sarah's breath came in shallow gasps as she crouched behind an old bookshelf, clutching her bag tightly. The documents and USB drive were her only link to the truth, and she couldn't let them fall into the wrong hands. The basement door creaked open, and a beam of light swept across the room. Sarah held her breath, pressing herself further into the shadows. She could hear the intruders' heavy breathing as they descended the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the silence. "I know you're down here," a deep, menacing voice called out. "You shouldn't have come back, Sarah." Sarah's blood ran cold. How did they know her name? She didn't recognize the voice, but it was clear they were after her. She had to get out, now. As the intruder moved closer, Sarah spotted a small window near the ceiling. It was her only chance. She waited until the intruder was on the opposite side of the room, then made a break for it. She scrambled onto a stack of boxes, her hands slipping on the dusty surface. The window was just within reach. "Hey!" the intruder shouted, spotting her. "Stop!" Sarah didn't look back. She pushed the window open and squeezed through, scraping her arms and legs on the rough edges. She landed hard on the ground outside, the impact knocking the wind out of her. But she didn't have time to recover. She could hear the intruder climbing after her. She stumbled to her feet and ran, her legs pumping as she sprinted through the backyard and into the woods behind the house. The rain had turned the ground into a slippery mess, and she slipped and fell several times, but she kept going. She could hear the intruder crashing through the trees behind her, their heavy footsteps growing closer. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to think of a plan. She couldn't lead them to her apartment. That would be the first place they'd look. She needed somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't expect her to go. Then it hit her. Her childhood friend, Mia. They hadn't spoken in years, but Mia's family lived nearby, and Sarah knew she could trust her. She changed direction, heading toward Mia's house. The chase seemed to last forever, but finally, Sarah burst out of the woods and onto a quiet residential street. She could see Mia's house just a few blocks away. She pushed herself to run faster, her lungs burning and her legs aching. As she reached the front door, she pounded on it with all her strength. "Mia! It's Sarah! Please open the door!" After what felt like an eternity, the door opened, and Mia's shocked face appeared. "Sarah! What the hell?" "No time to explain," Sarah gasped, pushing past her into the house. "Lock the door! Now!" Mia hesitated for a moment, then quickly locked the door and closed the curtains. "Sarah, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah collapsed onto the couch, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. "It's my stepmother," she said between ragged breaths. "She's involved in something terrible, and now they're after me." Mia stared at Sarah, her eyes wide with shock. "What are you talking about? Who's after you, and what does your stepmother have to do with this?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She pulled the documents and USB drive from her bag and handed them to Mia. "My dad left these for me. He knew something was going to happen to him. He said Evelyn was involved with dangerous people, and now they're trying to silence me." Mia's hands trembled as she flipped through the documents. They were filled with financial records, names, and transactions that made no sense to Sarah, but seemed to mean something to Mia. Her face grew pale as she read. "Sarah, this is bad," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "These documents, they're evidence of money laundering. And not just small-time stuff. This is organized crime level. If your stepmother is involved in this..." "Then she had my dad killed to keep him quiet," Sarah finished, her voice breaking. "I knew it. I knew she was hiding something." Mia nodded, her expression grim. "We need to take this to the police. But you said your dad warned you not to trust them. What if they're involved too?" Sarah's stomach churned at the thought. If the police couldn't be trusted, who could they turn to? She felt a wave of hopelessness wash over her, but she quickly pushed it aside. She couldn't give up. Not now. "There has to be someone we can trust," Sarah said, her voice firm. "Someone outside the system. A journalist, maybe. Someone who can expose this without putting us in more danger." Mia thought for a moment, then snapped her fingers. "I know someone. My cousin Jake. He's an investigative journalist. If anyone can help us, it's him." Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. "Can we call him?" Mia nodded and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number and put the call on speaker. After a few rings, a man's voice answered. "Jake, it's Mia. I need your help. It's urgent." "Mia? What's going on?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with concern. Mia quickly explained the situation, her words tumbling out in a rush. When she finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "This is serious," Jake said finally. "If what you're saying is true, this could be the biggest story of my career. But it's also incredibly dangerous. Are you sure you want to do this?" Sarah leaned closer to the phone. "We don't have a choice. My dad's life was taken because of this, and I'm not going to let them get away with it." Jake sighed. "All right. Meet me at my office tomorrow morning. Bring everything you have, and be careful. If these people are as dangerous as you say, they'll be watching you." After hanging up, Sarah and Mia spent the rest of the night going through the documents, trying to piece together the puzzle. The more they read, the more horrified they became. Evelyn wasn't just involved in money laundering. She was part of a vast network of corruption that reached high into the government and law enforcement. As the first rays of sunlight peeked through the curtains, Sarah felt a strange sense of determination. She had started this journey to uncover the truth about her father's death, but now it was about so much more. It was about justice, not just for her dad, but for everyone who had been hurt by these people. The next morning, Sarah and Mia arrived at Jake's office, a small, unassuming building tucked away in a quiet part of the city. Jake greeted them at the door, his sharp eyes scanning the street behind them before ushering them inside. "You're sure no one followed you?" he asked, locking the door behind them. "We were careful," Mia assured him. "Took a few detours just in case." Jake nodded and led them to a cluttered desk in the corner of the room. "All right, let's see what you've got." Sarah handed over the documents and the USB drive, her hands trembling slightly. Jake's expression grew more serious as he flipped through the papers, his brow furrowing in concentration. He plugged the USB drive into his computer and began scrolling through the files. "This is explosive," Jake said after a few minutes. "If this gets out, it's going to bring down a lot of powerful people. Your stepmother is just the tip of the iceberg, Sarah. This goes all the way up to some of the most influential figures in the city, maybe even higher." Sarah's stomach churned at the thought. "What do we do now?" Jake leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "First, we need to make copies of everything. If they find out you have this, they'll stop at nothing to destroy it. Second, we need to get this to someone who can protect you, someone outside their reach." "Who?" Mia asked. "You said the police might be involved. Who can we trust?" Jake hesitated for a moment, then said, "There's a federal agent I've worked with before. She's clean, and she's got the resources to take this on. But it's risky. If we tip off the wrong person, it could blow up in our faces." Sarah took a deep breath. "We don't have a choice. We have to try." Jake nodded. "All right, I'll reach out to her. In the meantime, you two need to lay low. Don't go home, don't contact anyone. Stay here until I get back." After Jake left, Sarah and Mia sat in tense silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Hours passed, and the tension grew unbearable. Finally, Jake returned, his face grim. "I spoke to Agent Martinez," he said. "She's on her way, but she warned me that this is going to get messy. Once this story breaks, there's no going back." Sarah nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I'm ready." Agent Martinez arrived shortly after, a no-nonsense woman with a steely gaze. She listened intently as Sarah and Jake explained everything, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "This is bigger than I thought," Martinez said when they finished. "If what you're saying is true, we're looking at one of the largest corruption scandals in decades. But we need to move fast. If they find out we're onto them, they'll cover their tracks." Over the next few days, Sarah, Mia, Jake, and Agent Martinez worked tirelessly to build a case. They gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and prepared to expose the truth. But as the pieces fell into place, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. One evening, as Sarah and Mia were leaving Jake's office, a black SUV pulled up beside them. Before they could react, the doors flew open and several men jumped out, grabbing them and shoving them into the vehicle. "Let us go!" Sarah screamed, struggling against her captors. "Shut up!" one of the men growled, pressing a cloth to her face. The world went dark. When Sarah woke up, she was in a dimly lit room, her hands tied to a chair. Across from her sat Evelyn, her face twisted into a cold smile. "I warned you to stay out of this, Sarah," Evelyn said, "but you just couldn't let it go, could you?" Sarah glared at her, her fear replaced by anger. "You killed my father. You're not going to get away with this." Evelyn laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "Oh, sweetheart, you have no idea who you're dealing with. You think you can take us down? You're just a naive little girl playing a dangerous game." Before Sarah could respond, the door burst open and Agent Martinez stormed in, followed by a team of armed officers. "Freeze! Everyone down on the ground!" Chaos erupted as the officers subdued Evelyn and her accomplices. Sarah's heart raced as she was untied and pulled to safety. "Are you okay?" Martinez asked, her voice filled with concern. Sarah nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "It's over, isn't it?" Martinez smiled. "It's over. Thanks to you, we've got everything we need to bring them down." As Sarah watched Evelyn being led away in handcuffs, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. Justice had been served, but the cost had been high. Her father was gone, and her life would never be the same. But she had done what she set out to do. She had uncovered the truth. Epilogue. The scandal rocked the city, leading to the arrest of dozens of high-profile figures. Evelyn and her associates were sentenced to life in prison, and Sarah's father's name was cleared. Though the pain of his loss would never fully go away, Sarah found solace in knowing she had honored his memory. As she stood by his grave one final time, she whispered, "I did it, Dad. I made sure they paid. Rest in peace." And for the first time in months, Sarah felt a sense of closure. The storm had passed, and though the road ahead would be difficult, she knew she had the strength to face it.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.